How long does it take to tell a story? How about one sentence? Welcome back to Techstination. I'm Fred Fishkin. Joining us is author Gary Lippman. Hi, Gary.
Hi there, Fred. How are you today?
Terrific. Well, your latest work is titled We Love the World But Could Not Stay, a
Right.
collection of one sentence stories. One sentence. We'll get
Yeah.
to that in a minute. First, Gary, tell us a little bit of background about yourself here. I understand you have a law degree.
I have a law degree from Northwestern University, and I'm going to my law school reunion this weekend, 30th year. So I'm looking forward to seeing old friends. I practiced for somewhere at somewhere called the Innocence Project, where we would use DNA evidence to exonerate innocent people when we believed they were innocent. I did that for a long time, part time at times, but was really into that. But all the while, I was very interested in writing. So I did journalism along the way, and did travel writing for photos, and always wanted to write fiction. So a few years ago, I published my first novel, which is a dark Hollywood saga called Set the Controls for the Heart of Sharon Tate. And following that, I wanted to try something very different, and I hatched the idea of writing one sentence stories. I'd always been a fan of short stories and thought I'd like to try my hand at it. And when I was beginning, I thought, you know what, let me have a unifying thing here. And so I decided on the one sentence idea, asking myself, how much story can I fit into one sentence? And the results are in my new book.
And there's I guess, I don't know if it's subtitles, stories for people with a limited attention span.
Right.
Sounds
Yeah,
perfect for our TikTok world, doesn't it?
it does. Yeah, unfortunately. My other joke about the book is if you don't like one story, the next story is only half a sentence away.
That's terrific. Do you have some favorites here? I mean, there's quite a variety here, and you do take liberties, I guess, in saying one sentence because some are on the long side for one sentence, not long stories, but
Yeah,
for one sentence.
I decided, many of them are short, as you'd expect, but many are very long because I wanted to push the envelope, so to speak, or push the period away. So I use semicolons and a lot of commas. In fact, a friend of mine said to me when I told her that I was doing one sentence stories, she immediately figured out that I was going to break some rules, grammatical rules. So she said, "Oh, so I bet you're using commas instead of periods to tell these stories." Busted. She got it right. But a lot of the longer stories are among my favorites, but a lot of the shorter ones too. So
You want to share some of the
sure.
favorites? You write about your dad once in a while in here too.
Yeah, my dad's in there a lot. My mom. I usually I found that what I would often do is about one third of the stories are autobiographical, taken from my life, or taken from stories I've heard from friends. Another third of the stories are purely invented. Just used my imagination and went to town. And the next third, maybe the biggest of the three, biggest third, so to speak, a little more than a third, are stories that started out as autobiographical, true to life, but which I then set my imagination loose on them and changed things. So I went to town, changing the reality, giving it a twist at the end, or changing the location, changing the characters, etc.
And
So
some
an
some can
example,
get a little on the quirky side.
yeah. Well, here's one of the quirkiest and a very short one, which starts the book. And this was one of the first stories I wrote. This is purely imaginary, as you'll understand. It just was a kind of musing I had. This one, which begins the book, is called Moonburn, and it goes, "You woke to find the full moon on your cheek, neatly balanced as if it belonged there. But you mistook it for a pimple and you popped it."
That's terrific. So tell me, I mean, this writing is so different I suppose, from any other kind. The whole process where if you're developing characters or whatever, that you have to continually add to the story and build on it. With these, you sit down and you have something germinating in your head, you write it down, and then you can leave for a while and come back.
Exactly, exactly. I would usually, I've heard it said that short stories, even very long short stories, ideally should be written in one sitting, the first draft that is, and can be read in one sitting, where your attention is unbroken, essentially, and or ideally, and unlike a novel, it's something that you take in at once, much like a poem. This was an extreme example of that because I would have an idea. For example, the very short story I just read, I just got an idea of the moon settling on your face. I don't know where that came from, maybe in a dream. And then my imagination took over, and I thought, well, what would it feel like to have that? And then I thought, it might be mistaken for a really big pimple. And what do you do with pimples? And there was the story, and when I looked at it after writing it, I thought, I like that. And I think a lot of times with writing, you either capture a memory, as I said, create something out of your imagination, or do a mix of the two. And once you get it down, you like it or not. And the ones I liked, I would then revise. This one obviously didn't take a lot of revision because it's so short, just moving a few words around. And the idea is that the reader will read it and smile or feel a tinge of sadness because a lot of the stories are not silly like the one I just read, but sad or philosophical. And so
Tell me, I mean, with some there are some, I suppose, lessons that you're trying to convey here once in a while. I like, for instance, the one about your father in flight school,
right,
or
yeah,
pilot training.
yeah. I don't have that one right to hand, but that's an absolutely true story. My dad told me when I was a kid he wanted to be a pilot in World War II, but he ended up crashing the test plane, the practice plane that they had him in during his first flight. Fortunately, he wrecked the plane pretty much, but he didn't get hurt, and his instructor, who was next to him, didn't get hurt. And my father abashedly turned to his instructor, who was a guy from the deep south. My father's name was Buddy. And Buddy, my father, turned to the flight instructor sheepishly when he crashed the plane, knowing that he was now not going to be able to take another plane. He was done. He was not going to be a pilot because you crashed the plane, you washed out. You're not moving ahead. I guess my dad did something wrong. So he turned to the instructor and shrugged and said, I guess that was a bad landing. And the instructor said to him, Bud, any landing, or no, I'm sorry, my father said, I guess that wasn't a very good landing. And the instructor said to him, Bud, any landing you walk away from is a good landing. So my dad got the hope, well, maybe, but no, he was washed out. He was not going to continue as a pilot. He ended up working as a radar operator in fighter planes, where I asked him if that was dangerous. And he said, no more danger. It's danger to everybody on the plane if you get shot down. But there was one job on a fighter plane that was more dangerous than the others, which was the gunner, because he had the open area where the gun, where he
Sure.
needed the room to maneuver the heavy gun. And so the enemy planes would aim their artillery, their fire at him, the gunner. For obvious reasons, he was easy to get. And of course, they wanted to stop him from gunning. So my father said they had a very high fatality rate, the gunners
Right.
on
And
fighter planes.
the lesson in that story that you told, obviously, is any landing you walk away from is good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually a really beautiful way to think about life, not just airplane situations, but, have a little perspective. If you lose your job or lose your spouse, it's pretty bad, but you've walked away from that, right? You can find another job, you could find another spouse ideally. So it's not quite the end of the world. Yeah.
And then when you talk about being autobiographical, you talk about there's a story about New Year's Eve at Lake Hopatcong and the legend there.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I say there's a well, that's not well, yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that one. That story, let me I don't want to I don't know quite, can't remember quite where that is. Um, the gist of it is so short I could sum it up. The gist of it is there's a legend that every New Year's Eve an angel rises from the depths of Lake Hopatcong, which is, of course, a local lake for New Jerseyans. Or it's in Jersey or Pennsylvania. Now I
That's
can't
it. That's
remember.
in New Jersey.
It's
Yes.
in Jersey. Yeah, I thought so. So there's a legend that every um, uh, New Year's Eve, an angel rises from the depths of Lake Hopatcong and asks the first person the angel sees, does Gary Lippman still worry too much about what other people think about him? And when the angel hears the answer yes, the angel shakes its head ruefully and sinks back into the lake for another year.
Well, we're thinking pretty highly of you, and the book has won some pretty interesting praise too from some well-known people.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have blurbing the book, praising the book, printed on the back cover, is a blurb from the great multimedia artist, the great songwriter, music figure, writer, painter. She's a quadruple threat as an artist, Laurie Anderson, who wrote I love short stories, and these are the shortest ones I've ever read, and yet they have all the elements of my favorite shorts: amazing characters, compelling situations, and beautiful cliffhangers. So I was really happy to hear that from Lori. I also got a blurb from Tom Robbins, the great novelist whose work I really love too, as I do Lori's, who wrote, of course, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, one of my favorite novels. Also, two actors, Lorraine Bracco from The Sopranos and Goodfellas, and Matthew Rhys, the star of the television show Perry Mason, and also,
The
uh,
Russians, no,
yeah, The Americans.
or the
Yeah,
Americans. Well, they were the
fantastic show.
Russians. They were the
Yeah,
Russians in the
well, yeah,
Americans.
that's a great show. I highly recommend to everybody. Of course, um, everybody knows about The Sopranos, but The Americans, which ran a few years ago for several seasons, was a beautiful show about a married couple played by Matthew Rhys and his real life partner, Kerry Russell. They play Russian KGB agents in the 1980s who were implanted here years before the 80s to seem like ordinary, everyday Americans, but actually they're KGB agents doing espionage and sabotage while pretending to be this happily married husband and wife with children. And there's an FBI agent who lives nearby on their tail, not realizing that his neighbors are the very people, the KGB agents who he's pursuing. So Matthew was kind enough to give me a blurb, as did the others, and I really appreciated that.
Very well done. So both that series and the book. So
Thank you. Yeah.
tell us where people can go to for more information about you and the book.
Well, I have a website, Gary Lippman Official, and all the social media stuff is, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are under that name, Gary Lippman Official. My book can be found in the better bookstores and in some Barnes and Nobles and a lot of independent bookstores, who, of course, I support. We want to help our independent bookstores as much as we can. And it's available online as well on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the Target, all the main websites.
Terrific. And we're going to add this for people who are listening. It's Lippman is Lippman.
Right.
Gary, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you, Fred. I enjoyed speaking with you.